All right, hello. I'm Jacob Solt, and I'm going to be introducing Google Forms today. We'll get started. All right. So, I've been using Google Forms for about 3 years. I use them for about 80% of the time. 4 out of 5 days is usually a Google form, and then the 20% other days is like projects. It's like a spreadsheet or a Google slide presentation or something like that. When I want, so I'll get it more into that. So Google Forms. What's a Google Form? Well, learning targets first. Learning targets. For the ultimate learning target is that I want you to be able to say that you can use Google Forms to collect and analyze formative learning data from your students. All right, that's ultimately where I'd like you to get to. But in terms of this particular presentation, we're going to deal with some sub learning targets, right? That you can understand the advantages and disadvantages of Google Forms, that you can build a Google Form, and that you can use Google Forms to give your students quality feedback. So let me talk about now. Let's talk about those when to use it. You want to use Google Forms when you want to collect data, all right? And what kind of data are you going to collect? You're going to collect formative learning data mostly. That's what I mostly use it for. But there's other kinds of data you might want to collect. You might want to collect summative assessment data, like actually use Google Forms for your tests and quizzes. Maybe that's all you use it for, is for tests and quizzes. It's great for that. When I ask the students, what their preferences are, what kind of things they like. I teach advanced algebra with financial applications, and so I might ask the students, hey, what unit do you want to learn next? Here are 10 possible units. Which one? And so just to collect their preferences. I have also used Google Forms for social emotional learning. Things like would you rather? I'll create like 10 would you rather questions. And then the nice thing about Google Forms is after every student has answered the Google form, I can then go and then show and share with the students the analysis portion of a Google form where like all the responses are anonymous, like you can't see who said what, but all the responses are collected together, so you can see like what percentage of the class would rather do this rather than that, right? So you kind of get an idea of what do you like, Spider-Man or Batman? And we got to see the percentages, and Google Forms allows you to see the pie charts and get bar charts and graphs fairly quickly because you're collecting that data and it can help you analyze that data. So social emotional learning. What else? I also used it for I had a thing called three questions, three deep philosophical questions. Right, it would start something light, something a little bit deeper, and then like a deep philosophical question. What is beauty? What is the different? What is justice? These kinds of things. Eventually would get to, but they're little steps, little steps. So social emotional learning, and I as a special educator, I also use it for IEP data collection. Right, when I work with a student with their level one career assessment, I use a Google form to collect their data, and I give them the choice. Either they can fill it out themselves, and then that's great. Then I get actual, like I can quote them from the text of the data I collect. Or I also use Google Forms to give to parents, so I can collect data from parents about their students. So when you want to collect data when you want to collect data, Google Forms is a great tool. All right. Advantages. Golly, one of the big advantages for Google Forms that I like is easier and faster grading. I'll get more in depth about this, but Google Forms, the integration with Google Forms and the Google Classroom gradebook is amazing. One-click importation of all the grades in Google of a graded Google form automatically can one click the whole class get transferred over at once. I love that. I love being able to grade each question at a time. I like being able to use one Google form for more than one section of a class, so I can grade all the sections at once, and I can do that one question at a time. And it's all anonymous, so I don't know who's giving me the response. I can just kind of grade it based on that, and I love the feedback that I can give to students too. It really is a tool that allows me to provide some quality feedback, the kind of stuff that if you're writing feedback on a piece of paper, you're probably not going to write a paragraph. With Google Forms, you write one paragraph to one student, and then you can kind of like copy most of that, which applies to other students who also maybe made an error on that question, and you can fix that. and I'll talk more about those in the future, right? That easier individualized feedback for students. You can really kind of customize some feedback for them because, really I feel passionately about having students give things a retry, right? It's the idea is that learning is a process, and you're not going to get all the right answers all at once. So that that I can give them that feedback, and then they can resubmit it to me, and I can regrade it, and it makes that regrading process a lot easier, right? Yeah, and so another great thing about Google Forms, the formative assessment analysis, right? That formative assessment analysis, the ability to see how students are improving over time, all the little different bar charts and data analysis, statistical analysis that Google Forms automatically performs every time. I love being able to see the spread in terms of, where is my average, my median, my min, my max, where are my students falling on this assignment, where it gives me an idea of where they're at. I can see, how well the entire class is doing on a particular question, right? All at once. I've collected all their data is right there, and I can look at it. I can also export all their responses to an Excel spreadsheet and do awesome data, cool stuff with that. So yes, the formative assessment analysis, kind of like a lot of the tools that like Go Formative. Google Forms does a lot of what Go Formative does. Multimedia, the power to add videos and pictures. One of the things I love about Google Forms is the multimedia aspect of it, and of course the thing for remote learning. The idea that students can download a Google Forms app on their phones, and they can complete your assignment on their phone. When they are, Uh, not having access to a Chromebook. Is it as easy on a Chromebook? Especially not for the typing. It'd be better to have a keyboard, but they can. Um, Adding videos and pictures, right? You can add pictures to illustrate things. You can add in. I use Screentastic right now to just do quick videos like this, and then I can then insert those videos to YouTube, and then I can put a link to those videos in the Google form, which allows students to access the instruction even if they're not in class. So it allows for that ability to give students that asynchronous instruction even when they're not in the particular Zoom classroom. And of course, you can just record if your students are okay with them being recorded. If everyone's okay with that, if the parents have signed off, you can press record in your Zoom session and then have those videos uploaded to YouTube fairly easily. You can just drag and drop them over to the YouTube, and now you've got the instruction for that day in your Google form. Any student that wasn't there can still get that instruction. It saves you a lot of time in the long run because you're not having to necessarily to reteach it. You can redirect students that weren't there that day to the video. Disadvantages of Google Forms. One of the disadvantages, like if you're using Google Slides or if you're using Google Docs currently, maybe you already like the idea that you can kind of watch what students are doing as they're doing it. That's kind of a cool thing with Google Slides and Google Docs, is the ability to kind of peek in, look over the shoulder of a student, see how they're doing. You can't do that with Google Forms. The student needs to click submit for that information to be sent for you to collect that data. And then that goes into the other downside. Sometimes students are used to this idea that they can type on any Google form and it saves automatically as they type. Google Slides, Google Docs, Google Sheets, they all save as you're making the document. But Google Forms, they got to click this little submit button at the end. Otherwise, that data doesn't go anywhere. If they X out that tab, boom, their assignment is gone, their responses are gone. So that's no fun. But a student says, "Oh, sorry, I did this tab." If the student, I can just exempt them from that one or something. That's not a problem. Google Forms. Disadvantages when not to use Google Forms, right? Google Forms is really not a project-oriented platform, right? You're not going to assign like a portfolio type project or an art or music project or anything like that. I don't really see, if I'm going to, for my math classes, if it's a project, it's going to be, probably a Google spreadsheet, a Google Sheet, or a Google Slide, maybe, if I wanted to do a presentation of information. So yeah, Google projects really don't work. Long form writing tasks, yeah, you can kind of do like a paragraph is fine in Google Form, but multi-paragraphs, use a word processor. Don't bother with Google Forms for a long form writing task. Use a Google Doc and give them a rubric, and which goes into so what else? Any student artifact where you would normally like create. It's kind of like it's hard to grade because it's kind of imprecise, where you need kind of a rubric to kind of shore up and define exactly your expectations for students, that's the kind of thing that's like a project that you're going to want to not use Google Forms for, right? Google Forms is like its own rubric built in. So if you need something that's kind of needs more definition of your expectations and things, in which you normally create a rubric, probably Google Forms is not your jam. All right, for that particular application. But for collecting data, whew, it's great. All right. So you can grade Google Form submissions, and you can see one of the great things I love about it is you can see all the responses to one question at a time, which allows you to provide quality feedback to students, right? So like normally if you were grading papers, right, you'd have worksheets, and you'd have maybe 30 worksheets in front of you or 100, and you're going through them one at a time, and each student, you're going through each question for each particular individual at a time, whereas with the Google Form, you're looking at question 2 for every student all at once, right? And then you start seeing patterns that the same students are getting kind of the same things wrong, and now you can provide direct quality feedback for that particular question for those students that didn't get that one right. Boom, and for the students that do get it right, you can, good work, good job, well done. You can provide that quality feedback and because it's so much faster when you're only dealing with one question at a time. Sorry, I got a little ding dong. That's my motion detector out front. Sorry. So yeah, so you're seeing one question at a time, and you can get it all done. You give them the points, move on to the next question. So much faster. Because Google Forms is integrated again, I said this before, but because Google Forms is integrated in the Google system, it's integrated into Google Classroom. So you can import all the grades that you did on Google Forms into the Google Classroom gradebook with a one-click per classroom assignment. So like if you've got 3 different sections and you assign to the same Google form 3 times, you'll need to go into each assignment and click it once to import those things. Also, when you get done grading Google Forms, you can click a button that sends out responses, and then now each student gets an email with your individual feedback, so they can look and see what they did wrong and then go back into the form and fix those things. You would build a Google form in much the same way you'd build a teacher-made, no, I meant teacher-made assignment. So if you already use teacher-made, Google Forms, you're going to feel pretty comfortable building them. TeacherMade has some more interesting tools in terms of graphs and writing and annotating on top of a PDF. TeacherMade is really a tool for annotating, creating interactive annotated PDFs. Google Form, it takes much the same structure, but you're kind of importing those questions yourself. All right. And I'll show you how to do that and when we get to that part. And then, so you can take nearly any worksheet or textbook assignment and you can recreate it as a Google form. And now it's a mobile assignment, and you can include that instruction. You can include those videos. You can include pictures. You can customize things for your students. Yeah, you can just customize it for your students. I'll have I do a lot of word problems in advanced algebra with financial applications. So, I'll add stuff about, dinosaur barbecue. Somebody works at dinosaur barbecue. They make, 15, 25 an hour. They work 35 hours this week. How much do they make? These kinds of things. I can bring pieces of local flavor and add a picture of dinosaur barbecue right there. I can add these pictures of local flavor into a Google form, and a textbook wouldn't have necessarily, those customized touches. With a Google form, I can change the names on the questions to the names of the students in the classroom. So, Genesis makes $45,528 a year. How much does she make per month? Genesis now gets pretty excited thinking about how much money she's going to be making per month, given that question. So, you can customize Google Form questions in a way that, can really engage your students. So we're going to preview a finished product. So sometimes it's nice to see where you're going in order to get there, right? To see where. So this is just, let me just give you an idea of, this is for me what a finished Google form will look like, and this is the student view. All right, this is the student view. I hope I'm recording the right screen now. Okay. Anyway. Okay, so I have my the name of that particular this Google form. This Google form is day 6. The way I do lessons, I have a lesson and I break it up into a series of days until I feel like I've completed. I've given the students enough towards the learning targets for that lesson. But a lesson might include more than one learning target. All right, so there might be more than 2 or 3 learning targets for a lesson that goes over the course of 6, 7 or more days. And so I have my learning targets here. I have my vocabulary here. On day 1, I can start to pre-teach my vocabulary. Normally, I don't talk about the standards when I'm talking to the class, when I'm talking to the students, but it's there in case the students want it. This is important. I'll get to that when building the students. Have the students put in their name. Even if you're going to make this 0 points, have a question. The first question be your name. It'll make it easier later for you. All right, and then of course, I can include these things like the topics that we're doing this unit, just give them the plan of study for the units and the plan of study for the lessons, just so the students can see where they're going. These are just artifacts also for me because I'm kind of putting my lesson plan in the actual Google form, so that way I have it as kind of artifacts that I use to kind of plan instruction. And I'm just kind of letting the students in on that. And so here's like an image. There's no real purpose for this image other than to break up the fact that I just, bored them to tears with some text over here. So I just pop an image in there, and I'm going to ask them what are the learning targets. And this is just something I like to do. You don't have to do this, of course, but if we mentioned the learning targets in the beginning of a lesson, I'm going to ask them to go back and find those learning targets, which were right over here, and even just copy and paste them. That's fine. This is my evidence that they actually paid attention to those learning targets for more than half a second, right? And then I'm going to ask them, what is collateral in terms of lending? And maybe we want to add a picture of collateral in here from Google Images. But I didn't do that in this case, but that absolutely could be done. So there's another question. This short answer question, a short answer question. It's 2 points. The student can see how many points it's worth. Here is a video where it's me talking to the students on how to do this problem right here. Right? We have Juliana taking out a loan. We're going to use the monthly payment formula. So here's a question where it's a short answer question, but I added an image to the question. So that's kind of the idea there. This is just another short answer question. So I have a video embedded into this Google form. I got some images embedded in the Google form, more monthly payment, and then now I have a multiple choice question. You could do all multiple choice. In fact, if all your Google Forms are multiple choice, then, well, that's really great. Google Forms can grade it all, if it's multiple choice, can grade it all automatically, and you won't even have to, the grading aspect is even easier. I don't like multiple choice myself, but I use them occasionally. So when I do multiple choice, I'll give them like 10 possible responses. I don't want a guess. I want I want a calculation, right? I want a reasonable estimate at the very least. I always also add other, which means I'm going to have to manually grade this stuff because I can put an answer key in there, of course, for multiple choice, and it'll automatically grade. But what if I made a mistake on the answer key? What if a student? I want to see, if their choices aren't there, I want to see what they're thinking. So sometimes I throw in the multiple choice, sometimes not. And then here's just another image just got thrown in there. And at the very end, I'm going to have some questions, right? This is, I forget, what was this? Day 6? Day 7? Day 6. This is day 6. So where was I? I'm At this point, I want to know how they're doing on the learning targets. So I give them the learning targets again, and I ask them, hey, are you kind of successful? Mostly successful? Completely? By day 6, I'm hopefully they're mostly to completely successful with these learning targets by now. Research kind of indicates that students are fairly accurate at assessing their own learning. So, we don't have to have complicated assessment tools. You just ask them, how do you think you're doing with this? And they're pretty honest about it, actually. Sometimes I don't think they give themselves enough credit, honestly. But so there's the learning targets. Each one of them is on there, and I'm asking how they feel, and I'll ask them a question on what their effort is like. And then sometimes there's also a question like, do you have any feedback, questions, comments, these kinds of things. And then they click submit, right? They click submit, their answers go in, boop, it's there. All right, let me go back to where was I? There we go. That's a view of one possible finished product for you, just to kind of get an idea of where these are going. So this lesson here would be about 30 minutes of instruction. I think this one was planned for a 30-minute, possibly even a little bit more, right? So that's a finished product. Here's the basics on how to build a Google form, which I'll get to in the next video, which I'll append to this one. you're going to have to adjust some settings. We're going to talk about adjusting the settings of a Google form to what works best for you. And then you create a template. My template is to have, the title, learning targets, some vocabulary, some standards, and then, so those little pieces are in every single one of the Google Forms I create. Every time I do day one of a new lesson, I got to have new vocabulary, new learning targets. I'm going to have, new standards and things like that up there. And so these things change over time, but there's going to be some kind of learning target there every time, right? There's going to be a question that's going to ask about their comfort level and their with the how successful they were with meeting that learning target, even though learning targets are changing. So that part stays the same, even though it gets changes in each lesson. And of course, this means you're not reinventing the wheel for every lesson. When you can like create a copy of a Google form and then just modify it for that next lesson, which saves you a lot of time in building these. So after you've built a template once and you've got a template you like going, you just make a copy of the Google form for the next lesson, take out the body, take out the the learning exercises, and then just modify everything for the new lesson. And you're not reinventing the wheel each time. Most of you've already done it. So that's creating a template. Then you're going to produce learning tasks. This is where you create or copy learning tasks for your students. Again, you saw some multiple choice, some short answer. Google also allows you to do some long answer. Google Forms also allows you to do this document submission stuff. I didn't want to do that. I want to go back. There we go. And I did it again. Okay, never mind. There we are. Document submission. So it allows you to create a Google Doc and then submit the Google Doc in the Google form, and then I can get graded in that particular question of the Google form. That gets pretty messy and complicated. But it's kind of cool sometimes, like for spreadsheets, or if I'm doing geometry, I would sometimes ask them to submit a Google drawing. It allows them also to submit images, so I can have them do something on paper and have them take a picture of it with their Chromebook, with their camera on their phone, and then they can submit that picture of what they did on paper to the Google form, and then I can view it in the Google form, grade it in the Google form, and then automatically import that grade over into the Google Classroom. So there is a lot of potential there as students get more comfortable with using Google Forms and get better with it. But there's a little bit more learning curve there, and I only do that once in a while, like probably once a week. Probably I do something like a document submission, because that puts a whole new layer on things. If I don't do the document submission, it's all inside the Google form, and it's just easier for the students, especially if they're on the app, on the mobile app, right? And then supporting instruction. The Google form is great with the supporting instruction. I really like it because I can create an instructional video like this one, and I can then put that in the Google form again, so the student who has not been to class or slept in or whatever, they can still access the instruction from that day's learning. So they can just access that, and that improves our access to the curriculum. That's one of our number one priorities. And even if it's not going to be your videos, even if you don't feel like producing videos, you can find instructional videos on the internet, in your various field. And then include that as enrichment. It doesn't even have to be part of the assignment. It can just be enrichment for the students to improve their understanding. I'll often do that when I get into a subject where I'm like, okay, we're going to learn a little bit of this, but the rest of it, we're just going to pretend, we're going to put to the side and leave to a later date, because that gets a little bit complex. I'll throw in a little video that'll explain that more in depth for those students that are really passionate, who are interested, who are interested enough to watch a 5 or 10 minute video, but not to go Google around and find the answer themselves. And of course, the ability to add pictures, to add flavor, to illustrate and enhance with visuals your instruction. So that's some of the stuff that's the basics of creating a Google form and getting it running in your classroom.